Mr. President, hindi pwedeng sisihin na nagkulang tayo sa pagbibigay sa kanila. Kasi nga ang dami ngang pera na nandyan. Hindi nila pinamimigay ang pera dun sa mga nangangailangan at tinuturuan din natin sila ng leksyon.
For the year 2024, yung 2 billion increase ng Senate budget, sa BICAM ba nangyari o hindi? Ang sagot sa akin, sa plenary nating ginawa, which I accepted. But upon further research, I was given a wrong answer.
Pero 600 billion ang meron sila. Samantalang, ang dami natin din pangangailangan.
When I was asking the Senate Secretary about the 2024 budget of
Wala
the
pa ako
Senate.
nun,
Opo,
Mr.
hindi po sa yan.
Kasi akala ko ako yung sinasabihan mo
Hindi
eh.
po.
I know, Mr. President, that's also the question of many. And I've thought about this long and hard. And there's no denying that PhilHealth has a savings amount of 600 billion, Mr. President. And that's also the reason why initially the administration thought of it as a way also to augment certain short fundings that we had, for example, for health workers, etc. Hindi natin maintindihan ba't hindi nila ginagamit yung pera na nandun na meron sila na nakaimbak sa isang, ewan ko kung anong klaseng account yan, savings account, na ang kinikita ay mas mababa pa kesa sa inflation. Mr. President, hindi pwedeng sisihin na nagkulang tayo sa pagbibigay sa kanila. Kasi nga ang dami ngang pera na nandyan. Hindi nila pinamimigay ang pera dun sa mga nangangailangan at tinuturuan din natin sila ng leksyon. Kung bigay ka ng bigay, nandun lang yung pera, hindi naman nagagamit. Paano naman yung mga ibang programa rin ng gobyerno na nangangailangan din ng funding? Yun nga yung sinasabi ko, pag meron kang, syempre, di ba, sinasabi natin, 5 yung anak mo, lahat yan kailangan pantay-pantay na mabigyan mo. Totoo yun. Pero sa lahat sa kanila, tinitignan mo rin kung sino may pangangailangan at sino naman ang may kakayanan na itayo rin ang kanyang sarili. Yun din ang sinasabi natin, it's a leadership problem also in PhilHealth and it's a disbursement problem. Gaya nga ng sinabi ni Senator Cynthia, ang problema din sa PhilHealth, hindi rin natin alam kung ano ba talaga yung mga benepisyo natin. Wala tayong card na nagsasabi hanggang dito o ganyan ang maibibigay sa'yo, ang tagal-tagal ng approval minsan, hindi alam ng ating mga kababayan kung paano sila makapag-comply dun sa mga requirements. So ito yung mga nagiging issue. Hindi sila kulang sa pera. At alam ko yung iba talagang pinagdidiinan nito. Pero 600 billion ang meron sila. Samantalang, ang dami natin din pangangailangan pagdating sa edukasyon, pagdating sa infrastruktura. Alam mo, maganda talagang magbigay ng social protection, wealth transfer. Importante yan. Pero kailangan din natin ng wealth-generating initiatives kasi hindi natin mapopondohan ang mga ibang bagay na magbibigay ng suporta sa ating mga kababayan kung ang gobyerno ay walang programa na magpapalago ng ating ekonomiya.
I'm reminded of the saying that health is wealth. But I don't think, Mr. President, that we can use funds meant for health so that we will justify this, that we will generate wealth for the nation.
Mr. President,
so,
the budget of the DOH has increased from last year. So it may not have been an item, for example, in particular for PhilHealth. Pero, meron naman pong increase na nangyari dito sa DOH. From 241 billion 602 in 2024, yung BICAM natin nasa 247,923. So we are, of course, health is wealth. That's very important. But also, health, the financial situation of our country, the economy, and wealth-generating initiatives are important so that we can support social protection initiatives such as the health sector.
Sige, mag-digress po tayo muna sa health sector. Pero napansin ko po na ang ating final amount sa Department of Health is 247.9 billion pesos sa BICAM report. Mas mababa by 25.7 billion pesos from the GAB, 273.7 billion pesos. So, binawasan pa rin natin ang DOH. And then, ang ating ang ating pampalubag-loob lang ay yung level, nung binawasan na, yung ending amount is still higher than the 2024 GAE amount.
Yes, Mr. President.
But why did we reduce it, Mr. President, by 25.7 billion pesos, which is a very significant amount also, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, there are certain agencies that we also supported. Like, for example, the Department of Agrarian Reform, we had given them an increase for their budget. We also had given the state universities and colleges an increase in their budget. The DICT, we've also given them an increase. The Department of National Defense also has an increase. So, Mr. President, if possible, we would like to increase all. But then also because of the substantial budget allocation of other departments, we also made sure that departments that are also crucial have a respectable amount that they can operate with.
So, pwede ba nating masabi na itong 74.4 billion pesos ng PhilHealth na ziniro natin ay binigay sa ibang mga ahensya ng gobyerno na sa tingin natin ng ating committee na mas nangangailangan o mas deserving ng amount, at masasabi ba natin na hindi directly health-related yung napuntahan ng 74.4 billion pesos na yon? Mr. President?
Mr. President, hindi sa masasabi nating more deserving, more in need, perhaps.
Yes.
And then also, yes, I think I know where your next question will lead to. But yes, I think transparently you can look that if you look at the increase in some appropriations, they're not health-related.
Yes, they're not health-related. Ngayon, Mr. President, ang problema kasi yung timing din ng pagbaba natin eh. We want to teach them a lesson, pero 74.4 billion pesos tatanggalin natin, isi-zero natin. Pero hindi ba natin alam na pinasa natin dito sa chamber natin yung panukala na pababain ng premium rates. Nababa natin eh. At the same time, inutusan natin sila to increase their compensation packages, which ginawa nila. Tapos hindi lang dagdagan pa, may konsulta, etc. So, ang nangyayari po, Mr. President, we are being conservative with PhilHealth by reducing the subsidy by 74.4 billion pesos at a time when when PhilHealth has now committed to be more proactive, aggressive, and then we are returning some benefits to the direct contributors by lowering the contribution rate, Mr. President. Ganyan ang nangyari. So, parang hindi makatwiran yung makatwiran yung 74.4 billion pesos reduction, wrong timing pa. Now that kung ano yung itinuturo natin sa PhilHealth, pinipressure natin sila, gagawin na nila, Tapos ngayon, parang pipilayan natin sila para magawa nila yung sinasabi natin gawin nila, Mr. President.
Mr. President, unang-una, hindi ako naniniwala na mapipilayan sila. Kasi nga may pagkukunan pa rin silang 600 bilyon. So sabihin na natin, 70 billion ang hindi na nalaan sa kanila ngayon sa budget. Meron naman silang pagkukunan na 600 bilyon. Ngayon, sa susunod na taon, kung talagang tinupad nila ang kanilang pangako na number 1, mas iigihan nila ang pagbigay ng suporta sa mga may sakit na nangangailangan. Pangalawa, na-implement na yung batas. Ewan ko kung napasa na ba yung batas na yon na bababaan yung premium at hindi na dapat kasama sa batas yung pag-increase ng premium na yon. At saka natin masasabi na o sige, sa susunod na taon, 2026 budget, pwede na nating punuan muli sapagkat nagagamit na nila yung kanilang reserba.
Nakalimutan ko nga i-mention na pinush ko nga sila na magkaroon ng dental services at ngayon nababasa natin that they are also offering dental services, Mr. President.
Exactly, Mr.
to be
President.
covered.
I think this can be evaluated. For example, you have a child who has committed something, you're teaching your child a lesson, hindi naman porket na nag-reform na kaagad, ay ibibigay mo na muli. Kailangan mo nang patunayan rin na masusustain ito, magagawa niya talaga ng tuloy-tuloy. Kaya nga, dito, uulitin ko at alam ko marami rin ng magtataka dito, no? Pero 600 billion, may pera kang ganon. May mga ibang programa ng gobyerno na pwede ring pondohan at hindi naman maghihirap ang PhilHealth dahil meron silang pagkukunan para bayaran. Ang problema nga nila noon, hindi nila ginagawa yon. Kaya ngayon, salamat sa inisyatibo nga, sinabi nga natin yung ating minority leader, sinabi, dapat meron kayong dental benefits o gagawin daw nila o ginagawa na nila. O ngayon, may batas pero hindi ko alam, parang hindi pa yata napapasa na hindi muna itataas ang premium, 'di ba? Hindi pa yan batas. 'Di ba? Iamyanda pa lang natin 'yan. Hindi pa yan nangyayari. So sa ngayon, ang daming nagrereklamo na ang taas ng premium ng PhilHealth tumataas pero ang benepisyo nila hindi pa rin ganyan. Kaya meron pa rin silang nakokolektang premium na mas mataas.
Ang ating problema sa PhilHealth subsidy kasi, Mr. President, is yung formula is provided by law. Yan po, that is the long and short of it. Ngayon, by giving zero subsidy, are we in effect saying that we are suspending that the provisions in the Universal Healthcare Act and the syntax law? So thank you for correcting me. In the syntax law, which provides for that formula, which we discussed during we discussed, I think, during the budget deliberations. We mentioned the formula. So is that what we're doing? Number one, kasi when you give a government agency zero budget, talagang number one ang message dun punishment mo yan. Okay. And then but number two, merong rito na there is a formula and the formula yields I think around 74.4 billion pesos ang paggamitin yung formula, hindi pala 73, I will correct myself. 53.13 billion pesos ang may-yield nung formula, Mr. President, around that amount. So, is it also our message that we are suspending the formula found under the syntax law?
Mr. President, we are not suspending the implementation of a law. What we are saying is that at the moment it is an unfunded program or law of the government. You know, we have more than 1 trillion pesos of unfunded laws in the country. Maraming mga batas pero nagkukulang ang pondo para dito. Ngayon, the GAA in itself is also a law. I understand the Senate minority leaders mentioned, but this is earmarked. Earmarked ito, so dapat doon talaga napupunta. Pero yung BIR, for example, has also that earmark na they are able to harness or benefit from 1% of their total collections. But because they haven't really reached a certain utilization, the government has not given them that 1% supposedly that would go to them. So, Mr. President, this is not, sadly, the reality is this is not uncommon. And the GA itself is a law. We have a discretion also to look at the macro picture of a particular time in our society and economy and to see what fiscal space we have.
This is my opinion, Mr. President. The subsidy for PhilHealth is in the nature of is like an automatic appropriation because the law provides for the formula. Parang ministerial act na lang sa DBM to determine the amount under the formula and then give it as a subsidy. Minimum amount of subsidy kasi itong mga benefit packages dagdag na po yan. Pero minimum amount of subsidy is determined by law. So when we are discussing general principles ng budget, when they mention automatic appropriations, ang instruction nila sa Congress, you cannot touch automatic appropriations because the appropriation is provided by law. Meaning to say there are 60 billion pesos worth of foreign assisted projects, most likely the government counterpart amounts which are found in the program part of the appropriation.
Yes, Mr. President.
But these are not found in the budget for the Office of the Secretary of the DOTR. Saan siya nakalagay? Kasi 50.6 billion lang po ang total nung budget ng Office of the Secretary of the DOTR. That is not enough. 50.6 is not enough to fund 60 billion.
But that's just the Office of the Secretary. Di ba? Meron
Saan
mga
po
specific
saan po nakalagay?
projects that are mentioned.
Nasa specific agency na.
The entire budget of the DOTR is 87 billion, Mr. President. Yung OSEC lang yung sinasabi natin na
Correct.
50 billion should be less than the FAPs. But kasi hindi naman lahat ng FAP nandun sa DOTR.
Yes. Okay.
Meron
Thank
mga
you.
iba na hindi rin doon.
So found in the other agencies' budgets. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that input, Mr. President. And then just in writing, Mr. President, the decrease in the budget of the CHED by 26.9 billion pesos. Bakit po siya na-decrease ng ganito? And then saan yung NIA? I also noticed sa NIA, National Irrigation Administration, it also suffers a decrease of 23.1 billion pesos.
Mr. President, I think it's not a new it's not new to us, our disappointment with NIA's utilization and disbursement rate. So, tinignan lang natin kung ano ba talaga yung mga mai-implementa talaga nila.
Pero I'm assuming na yung NIA GAB level na 92.5 billion pesos, yan din yung NEP level. Is that correct?
No, Mr.
No?
President, actually na-increase. Na-increase yun, kaya nga
So may we know the NEP level for NIA?
42 lang siya sa NEP, Mr. President. 42 billion lang siya sa NEP.
So that means walang, theoretically, just looking at the amounts, dapat walang tatamaan sa NIA programs under the NEP. Kasi 42 billion siya and then ang final approval is 69.3 billion. Last point na. And my last point, Mr. President, which I'm just stating for the record and of course in the interest of transparency because it involves Congress, our institutions, Mr. President. After the BICAM, the Senate's budget will be increased by 1.1 billion pesos and the House of Representatives budget will be increased by 17.3 billion pesos. So ang start ng Senate 12.8 billion pesos plus 1.1 billion pesos. Ang budget natin is 13.9 billion pesos. Ang House of Representatives, ang starting amount nila 16.3 billion pesos, ang increase nila 17.3 billion pesos, ang ending budget nila 33.6 billion pesos. Ang aking lang basic point dito, Mr. President, kung ganito rin pala ang ending ng mga ang amounts, bakit hindi na lang linabas natin sa plenary at tiniskas? Bakit kailangan sa BICAM pa mangyayari ito, Mr. President, na halos lumampas pa sa doble ang budget ng isang chamber na bala ko sanang samahan na, salihan next year, Mr. President. But we have to be transparent with we have to be transparent about all of this, Mr. President. Na, diba, if you need, okay, we'll use mathematical terms. If you need 2x instead of x, bakit hindi pa na-reflect yan doon sa original bill na final mo? Sana pinare-reflect mo na yung 33 billion pesos na pangangailangan mo. That's my point, Mr. President. So I'm not expecting an explanation from our chairwoman kasi hindi naman niya ito kagagawan. So for more transparency in our budget process sana, we will discuss it sa floor. And then is our Senate Secretary here? Medyo mabuti is not here because I will talk about him, Mr. President. Okay. But he should not take this personally. Okay, para lang for the information of our colleagues. During the budget season, I interpellated on the Senate's budget. Okay. So happy kayo for the first time nag-appear ang ating Senate Secretary to answer questions. Ano yan? So basic factual question. For the year 2024, yung 2 billion increase ng Senate budget, sa BICAM ba nangyari o hindi? Ang sagot sa akin, sa plenary nating ginawa, which I accepted. But upon further research, I was given a wrong answer. Sa BICAM din po nangyari yun. Just like what is happening now, we also increased the Senate's budget by 1.1 billion pesos. So, just to make that clear, Mr. President, no, na
Mr. President, actually, nung second and third reading, nandun na yung increase natin na 1.1
dito,
billion.
for this year, for 2025 po yan. I'm talking about when I was asking the Senate Secretary about the 2024 budget of
wala
the
pa ako
Senate.
nun, Mr.
Hindi po sa yan.
Kasi akala ko ako yung sinasabihan mo
Hindi
eh.
po. That's why sabi ko nga, I'm talking about our Senate Secretary. So, just to be very, very transparent, no? Sana po magbigay din tayo ng mga accurate na sagot, Mr. President. Because marami na rin tayong experience dito sa budget season. Sagot lang ng sagot para lang matapos na yung proseso. Eh. Alam mo, sometimes binobola ka lang nung mga iba. Eh. Pero, well, anyway,
Hindi kita
Mr. President.
binobola, Mr. President.
No, that is one. Some of our resource persons, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I would like to put on record that I do not totally agree with everything that's been proposed also by the House. Unfortunately, I'm also trying to safeguard certain key points that I feel that we are more passionate about and what we believe we should also be able to protect. As the Senate President has mentioned, this is not a zero-sum game. Unfortunately, we all have our wish lists. Their budget is much larger because they're a bigger house, I suppose. But then the reality is we have to, like for example, certain projects, we've added provisions to make sure that there is a repertorial process for us to be able to monitor and audit whatever funding we have placed in some initiatives we feel needs to be safeguarded more profoundly.
Well, at the end of the day, budgeting is a political process, Mr. President. Alam ko naman yon. So, I'm just doing this, katulad doon sinabi ko sa umpisa, this is the duty of the minority. to ask questions and to bring out facts, just especially in the interest of transparency, so our people will know. Kasi ang ginagastos natin dito would be taxes taken from the people, non-tax revenues also taken from the people, plus loans, debt, national debt incurred in the name of the people. So that's the purpose, Mr. President, just for transparency's sake. So with that, I end my interpellation on the BICAM committee report, Mr. President.
Our due thanks to the extensive interjections of our distinguished minority floor leader, as usual.